Welcome to Uriah Heep, the Magician's Podcast. I'll be covering every studio song the band has recorded and every bonus track that I can find. Each week we'll go over a new song from the beginning to where they are currently, and as they keep adding albums, I'll keep adding shows. Let the deep dive party begin.
In the magic garden, some were singing, some were dancing.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Uriah Heep, the Magician's Podcast. I am your host, Scott Haskin, and you guys might be expecting me to say here is my co-host, Dave White. However, due to a last-minute scheduling conflict, Dave was unable to join me for this episode. And, it's kind of interesting. It actually works out because this is really a bonus track to the press of the album anyway. So I'll be doing this one by myself. We will miss Dave's commentary. It's been so good having him on this season and getting insight into different aspects of the band. Having seen them in the 70s, especially in this time with what so many people consider the classic lineup, even though the current lineup has been, the majority of the members of the current lineup have been around far longer than this lineup was. It's been a great ride going through this album. This whole thing was done at Dave's request. I wasn't going to cover any live albums. I'd had people ask me, but it wasn't really something I was interested in doing because to me, listening to a performance of a rock band, it's one thing to listen to like a classical music performance or an opera or something that's consistent. Rock music should be at least somewhat spontaneous, exciting, on the edge, in the moment. And to me, not being at that show, or at least being able to watch the show, it's completely out of context. And so with the exception of really the first two live albums I ever paid any attention to, which were Rainbow on Stage and Deep Purple's Made in Japan, I've never really gotten into live albums too much. So when I heard this one, I was already kind of over the live album concept. And so I'd only listened to it once until I started doing these episodes with Dave. And I'm glad I did. I mean, there's some really amazing talent on these songs. But it's interesting because Dave challenged me in the last episode before we recorded this when he said, go back and listen to the whole album. And I did that. And what I found was, because throughout this, I've been like, you know what, I do like this. I did enjoy that song. Going back and listening to this album without digging into it, like just as a listener, just putting it on, putting the headphones on, listening to the music, I found that I was kind of right back to where I was when it comes to live music. I think that there's a certain thing about being present for the particular concert, especially for a band where it's going to be a little bit different every night. I remember seeing a band called Kingdom Come at the Monsters of Rock Festival in Denver. And this would have been, I think it had to have been 88 or 89. And they were the opening band, and their album Kingdom Come had come out. I really loved this album. I couldn't wait to see them live. And I swear basically all they did was they played the CD and mimicked the instruments. It could not have been any more like the album. And I was so disappointed, except for a moment where they kind of destroyed the drum set for some reason, which was odd for an opening band playing a short set to do a whole drum destruction sequence. But I was just so disappointed because there was nothing live about it. And then other bands come on. You get to Metallica. Metallica plays the songs, but they do them in a different way. They're not a replication of the studio. They all have the same parts, but they're done very much alive, and that's what I think a live rock band should be. Something that, gives a good, proper nod to the studio song, but does it in its own way, makes it different than, because otherwise, why would I just not stay home and hear the record? Seeing the band live a couple times myself in recent years, finally getting to see them, they played the songs I knew, but they did them differently. They did them in their own way. I certainly knew the songs, I recognized them, but they had surprises in each of them. They felt different, and that's what live should be. And it should be different every night based on how the band is, how the crowd is, the venue, all those things that come together to inspire them to play the way that they do on any given night. And so as I said many times, I've never been a fan of live albums. Now, live videos I do enjoy because you get at least the experience. You kind of, you can turn out the lights and you can focus on the screen and kind of feel a little bit like you're there. But just listening to it live has never really been a thing that has connected with me. So I was really enjoying, going through the episodes, listening to the details and the parts and kind of dissecting it. But then when I backed off and just became a casual listener again, it just kind of put me back in that, live albums really aren't a big thing for me. So, it was an interesting experiment too. So challenge accepted and completed, Dave. Sorry, it wasn't the result you were hoping for, but at least while we've dug into the songs, I've enjoyed them. And that's the most important part. And I've enjoyed bringing them to you. I've got a lot of compliments on this season. People glad that we are covering it, glad that Dave was around, and just happy to dig into these live songs. And then, of course, it was, are you going to do this album? Are you going to do that album? And no. The plan for the show going forward, I'll say it now because I know I'll forget when I get to the end. There is going to be another season. It's going to be a very short season, but it will come up right after this one. I will be covering the Lansdowne tapes. There are 8 songs credited to the band Spice, which is who they were before Ken Hensley joined and they became Uriah Heep. There are 2 tracks, though, that I've already covered. And those are 2 versions of the song Born in a Trunk. Those were covered in early episodes of the show. So I'm not going to cover those again. They're the exact same versions. They were just on the bonus disc. The other 6 songs, however, were not, including a cover from Three Dog Night, which I was very excited to see that they did because I love that song. So that will be coming up immediately after. People have asked me, am I going to cover artists' solo albums, Ken Hensley's albums and stuff like that? No, because this show is a deep dive show. I have the permission by endorsement of the band to break down the entire song. Whereas with any of the offshoot members, I don't. I can get it for at least 2 that I know of. But the fact is, if I can't do it for everybody, I think it's kind of unfair to just pick certain members and cover what they've done. So without the ability to cover everyone, I probably won't. I did cover License to Rock, Paul Newton's album under the Newton Rainbow Project on my other show, the Haskin Cast podcast. I did that with Paul. That was a great time. So you can check that one out. I may, and I also dug into Ken Hensley's album, My Box of Answers, and Lee Kerslake's album, 11 on that show. Interviewed Steve Weltman, their manager, who's also Paul's manager. So those are all on the Haskin Cast podcast. I did move Steve's interview over to this one as well. But I may get inspired to cover an album or 2 specifically. But as far as doing like the entire band catalog, it's not a deep dive into the members. It's really just about Uriah Heep. And since Spice was really part of Uriah Heep, this is who we were like a day before we turned into Uriah Heep. And it's really interesting because the sound is different. The styles are different. David Byron sings completely different. You can see the inflections of where it would go, but it really was a different band. So I thought, having covered them from the beginning all the way to the current lineup, again, just waiting for the new album to come out, but everything through Livin' the Dream, I thought, we've watched their journey, but it's easy to, it's kind of like watching your hair grow. You don't notice it grow every day. And then all of a sudden you're like, wow, I need a haircut. You don't notice all the progressions that they've been through. So I thought, now that we've covered all the Uriah Heep stuff, it would be kind of nice to take a step back to the very beginning and really get to see how far they've come. So if you compare the Lansdowne tapes to Livin' the Dream, night and day. I mean, even if you compare Look at Yourself to Livin' the Dream, night and day. But a very amazing progression that this band has had over the 52 plus years they've been around. And I actually have already recorded all the Spice episodes. I had a great time doing them. They were a lot of fun. They were really cool songs to dig into. And I really love the Three Dog Night cover. So check that out. That'll be 6 episodes more that I wasn't planning on doing originally. But what the hell? We're going to be waiting for the new album. I still do not have a release date as of this time. But, we're all hoping for soon. I know that they're doing the 50th anniversary celebration that they weren't able to do on the 50th anniversary, thanks to a certain world epidemic. So I'm glad they're at least getting to do it now. And then I'm not sure if any of the new songs are going to be introduced during that, or if the album is going to wait to come out until after they've completed the anniversary, and then they can integrate the new songs. I know that they're not going to integrate the new songs until the album is out. Mick was very specific about that. But you never know. I mean, anything can change at any time, but that's the intent as of the last I've heard. And that's really all I know about it, guys. I'm waiting just like you are. So we'll see when it comes out. I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. I'm sure the sound quality is going to be very much on par with Livin' the Dream. You know, same engineer, same studio, same guys. I think that, a lot of bands, when they work in consistent studios these days, the albums have a very consistent production quality. If bands change out gear, it can sound a little bit different. If their playing style is a little bit different, it can change things, obviously. But the productions have been typically reasonably consistent from one album to another if those main factors have stayed the same. So I would anticipate that it'll be a heavy and wide-sounding album like Livin' the Dream was, which I welcome. I think that album sounded fantastic. No complaints on those mixes that I can recall. Nothing comes to mind. There might have been one or two little things I was nitpicky about, but I don't recall really any complaints with the sonic quality of that album whatsoever. Definitely not the writing or performance. That's 100% there. So our last song, guys, on this album is the Rock and Roll Medley, which is an interesting piece because I've heard a lot of feedback on this one, mostly negative, actually, which is kind of interesting. I think, with a band like Uriah Heep that has so many amazing original songs, to skip hearing an original or two to do a group of covers, it's an interesting trade-off. I mean, you only get so much time on stage, and you only can play so many songs in that time. If you play a song like Magician's Birthday, that's going to limit at least one other potential song you could have played if you're doing the full song and not like the minute 45 version you get here. If you're doing Salisbury, well, that's a 16-minute song live. It might be a little less if you're playing it faster, so maybe 15 minutes. But that's like 3 songs that you're cutting out of the show to play that one. So it's really, a trade-off. So in the medley, we have 6 songs, and we'll get into each of those songs as we get into the medley. But it's definitely an interesting thing for a band that has so much great material, especially even by now being on the Magician's Birthday tour. That's 5 albums that they had really great material to choose from. And, they encompassed a wide variety of it in the originals they played. But to take that time to do a bunch of older songs that the crowd may or may not identify with is an interesting choice. And not surprisingly, for the versions that didn't have, that were short one song, it would be this song, because this would be, the song that you would cut if you had to for time restraints or, any licensing issues obviously would be with these songs. So it really fascinating choice to play it, to put it on the album. There may have been other songs they performed. I don't know. I don't have any history or listing on any other songs that were done during these shows. Nothing in the dialogue that we hear indicates that there were any other songs. But I do believe that this was recorded over 2 or 3 nights, at least, just basing on the difference in sound quality from one song to the next. But they all sounded great. There's a couple I think I've mentioned where I thought the vocals were a little bit quiet. But apart from that, when you get live, you get live. You can fix it in post, though, if you're doing a multi-track recording like Dave said they were doing here. But maybe there were some nights that they didn't get enough on that they could do that. Maybe they didn't multi-track every night. I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't have any history on any of that. So before we get into the rock and roll medley, let's do a quick reminder of who our performers are in the band at this time. Of course, on vocals, we have David Byron. On keys and guitar, we have Ken Hensley. On guitar, we have Mick Box. On drums, we have Lee Kerslake. And on bass, we have Gary Thain. I think everybody was a singer. I'm not sure if Gary was or not. I can't remember if we talked about that. But I know all the other ones were. Obviously David Byron's the lead vocalist, but we got some Ken singing in there, and everybody's doing backups, which sound fantastic. It's interesting to hear as they get dialed into to the songs, like maybe the first couple lines aren't that great. And then like the rest of it's perfect as far as the sound goes. But man, these guys can just go right to the note without like hitting close and pitching up or down. Like they just know that note and they go right to it. Some of the greatest backups I've ever heard. I always said that Three Dog Night was one of the greatest backing vocal bands. I mean, those harmonies that they do are amazing. But I gotta say, Heep is right up there with them. And you think about the stuff they did in the studio, that's impressive. You can take some amount of time and do that. I mean, the studio costs money, so you got to move along. But, live, it's whatever comes out. That's what you get. So it's really impressive to hear what they do in the studio. It's extremely impressive to hear them nail it live and just to go right to those notes, to be right on time with each other the way that they are on this album is incredibly impressive. So our first song in this medley is called Roll Over Beethoven. This was first recorded by Chuck Berry. It has been covered ad nauseum by tons and tons of bands. And interestingly, Rolling Stone magazine has ranked it in the top 100 of the top 500 greatest songs of all time. Okay, I'm not a huge Chuck Berry fan. I greatly appreciate what guys like Chuck did for the music industry. And you think about people like Little Richard or, Elvis Presley, guys like that. And I can greatly appreciate the amount of, we would not have rock and roll the way that we do today. I think it would have happened eventually, but it might have been different. Certainly would have not developed in the same way. But I'm so grateful to those guys for doing the things that they did to open those doors and help create what we have today. But do I enjoy their music? Not particularly. There's a couple songs here and there I like, but for the most part, it just doesn't really connect with me. I really started more with Motown. That would be my entry point into music. I mean, classical, I absolutely love. I grew up listening to Beethoven, a huge fan of his music. I'll be covering it on my other show. But as far as just like general radio play type music goes, really for me started with Motown. That was what I grew up on. We listened to that a lot in the house, and we lived just outside of Motown, just outside of Detroit. So great kind of music for us. So this song in particular is one that I do find interesting that Rolling Stone would have thought that much of it. And I don't know what criteria they used on any of this stuff. I always find those polls to be kind of a waste of time to me, because people take so much ownership and possession of the music they like. Like it's almost as if they wrote it themselves. And if something doesn't get on the radio or doesn't get good reception, they just get angry. And, that poll's stupid because it doesn't match my taste and all that. I see this stuff on Twitter all the time. We've talked about that before, but it's interesting that they picked it to be there. So let's get into some Roll Over Beethoven.
I'm gonna write a little letter, gonna mail it to my local DJ. It's a rockin' little record, I got my target to play. So roll over Beethoven, I gotta hear it again today. You know my temperature's rising and the jukebox blowing a view. My heart beats a rhythm and my soul keeps singing the blues.
Well, David sounds really good on this. I think the vocals are just a little bit quiet, but let me fix that. I think the vocals are probably at a fine level. I think the organ is a little bit loud, kind of drowning out some of those vocals. Definitely the organ has a very strong presence. Fortunately, it's not drowning out Mick. You can really hear Mick coming through, but organ's in the right ear, Mick is in the left, so you have that separation. The organ is kind of covering the center a little bit too, and that's where David is. But it's really showcasing Mick's ability quite a bit. I love what he's playing here. He's just on fire, and as I've learned a lot more about, fingers on the fretboard and how you can make notes really without picking as much, I can hear that's what he's doing here. It's a very cool technique. I've seen him do it, just didn't understand how it worked until Dave explained it to me, because again, not a guitar player. But I think this is really cool. It's got a lot of energy to it. I like the vocals, the backing vocals coming in during that second section there. The bass is a little more subdued right now. If this had been a Uriah Heep song, I think Gary Thain would have covered the spectrum of his entire bass by now. But that's okay. You're playing other people's songs, so you have to decide how much of your own style you're going to put into it versus how much of the actual song that you want to play. How much respect are you going to give to it versus making it your own, which is not to disrespect the song. You're playing your own version of it. There's nothing wrong with that, but you have to make those decisions as you go. But so far, I think it's a really good tempo. I like the way it sounds. I'm not sure what's going on with those missing snares. I don't hear him hitting anything instead of the snare. Like, sometimes you might do a hit on the tom. If he is, I'm not hearing it come through in my headphones. So that's kind of a little bit weird, but I definitely love the energy in this. I think the vocals are fantastic, and it's really got just a good pace to it. I don't know if this was maybe this was an encore. That could be. That's a pretty long encore, and not to do an original song, again, would be weird for an encore, but maybe it was. I don't know. Okay, so that was a great solo. Now, I don't know this song, really. I've heard it maybe a couple of times by a couple of different bands. I don't know the Chuck Berry version, so I don't know how accurate this is to the original by any means. But I will say that just based on the rhythm and general melody of the song, that was a great solo for this song. Very energetic. I would imagine the Chuck Berry version probably had a piano solo, I would think. But in any case, I thought it was very respectful to the style of the song. Mick does what he always does. He stays within that, the meat of the song and doesn't make the solo feel out of touch with the song at all. I felt this was very much on par with the song I was listening to. So great job there. You could hear Gary picking it up a little bit too. Again, I don't know what the bass line was to these songs. Walking bass lines were pretty common back then, but of course, Gary might be playing that a little up more than the actual song did. It wouldn't surprise me, but again, staying within the context of the song for sure. This is an interesting part we're heading into where the instruments back off and we've just got the drums and vocals. Usually that's where you're visually motioning people to clap and stuff like that. I don't know what Dave is doing because I can't see it.
Roll over Beethoven. Roll over Beethoven. Roll over Beethoven, roll over Beethoven, rocking it 2x2. Roll over Beethoven, roll over Beethoven, roll over Beethoven, roll over Beethoven, roll over Beethoven. Tell Tchaikovsky the news about this one.
Okay, sounds like they're about to switch songs here, so I'll talk about our next song, which is called Blue Suede Shoes. This one was originally recorded in 1955 by Carl Perkins and was later recorded by the likes of Elvis Presley, Eddie Cochran, Buddy Holly, another one that's been covered by a lot of people. I'm probably more familiar with the Elvis version than anything else, but again, not a song I would say I know back and forwards by any means. Carl Perkins would go on to be part of the historic, his persona would go on to be part of the historic $1 Million Quartet. This would include Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, and Johnny Cash. And that was performed here in Vegas and all over the world. I never saw it, but my friend Martin had played Jerry Lee Lewis. I engineered an album of cover songs that he did. A lot of fun, really interesting. Oh, I did go to a show. It wasn't the $1 Million Quartet. It was the guys from the $1 Million Quartet performing some songs, but it wasn't the actual show. But in any case, they were known as the $1 Million Quartet. Very amazing group of people. Covered some of each other's songs from time to time. Really interesting time in music. You could see just this nucleus of power building. And so that's what I know about Blue Suede Shoes. Not a whole lot. But let's check out Uriah Heep's version of it.
One for the money, two for the show. Three to get ready now, go, but don't stop. Step on my blue suede shoes. You can do anything, I lay on my blue suede shoes. You can burn my house, steal my car, drink my liquor from an old fruit jar.
Wow, the organ really makes this song feel completely different than anything I've heard. I mean, they're playing it faster than the Elvis version, that's for sure. I don't think I've heard, I may have heard the Carl Perkins version, but certainly nothing memorable that I can say, oh yeah, I remember how it goes or how it sounds or anything. But there's a good chance I've heard it somewhere along the way. But yeah, the organ on this really brings out a whole different level of hard rock to it, I think. Very interesting. It's a little fast, so the vocals are, they feel rushed because the tempo's up. They're in sync with the tempo, but they just feel rushed because it's kind of cramming a lot of words into a small space anyway. Not quite like rap, but certainly, hard to squeeze all that in and make it all clear and succinct. So here, of course, we have another walking style bass line. Again, very common for this type of music. It was common in country too. It's just so much slower that you didn't really notice it was a walking bass line. But Gary sounds fantastic on it. I really like the drums. I could use just a little more bass drum or maybe a little more punch in this bass drum so it cuts through a little bit better because, playing these faster versions of it, having, that kick hit you in the chest a little more would be nice. But overall, it sounds pretty good. Well, great solo from Ken. And, as I'm listening to this, part of me really wonders what Carl Perkins would have thought or what Elvis would have thought of this version of the song. They were the ones that were really creating the origins of rock and roll, and to see where it came from, where they started it to where it went, even up to this point in 73, I would have loved to have heard, what their thoughts on rock and roll were at that point. Did it go too far for their taste? Were they like, wow, I can't believe what we started turned into that? Who knows? Who knows? It's certainly more powerful than what they did as, the instruments were added, like, a distorted Hammond B3 or, the heavy distorted guitar and, bigger sounding drums and stuff. It would be curious to know. I never will. But it would be interesting to see for sure. But this sounds good. It sounds like they're about to go back into what could be just their transition style for these. You could definitely tell why they wanted to do these. They sound like they're having so much fun playing them. They're really into them. Great solos. Gary's everywhere. Lee's on fire. David's, singing at the top of his game. Definitely, they're having fun with it.
Listen to this one.
I wonder if they aren't backing down a little bit, not just to do the transition, because it seems like that's how they're doing it, at least so far, but also to give Lee Kerslake a chance to get that extra harmony in there. That sounded really good. It was nice to add that high harmony. I could hear it on the right. I don't necessarily know if that's Ken, but in any case, it sounds really good. I really like the way that they put that together. I think they did a great version of that song, at least from what I know of it. So the next song up is a song I don't know at all. It is called Mean Woman Blues. This is by Claude Demetrius. It was first recorded by none other than Elvis Presley. See a theme here? I see a theme here. This song actually was also recorded by Roy Orbison in 1963. The original version came out in 1957. So completely different voice. Roy sounded a lot different than Elvis, and released it on a single with Blue Bayou, which apparently made it up to number 5 on Billboard's Hot 100 singles. Also, though, the Elvis version made it into, it reached number 11 on Billboard magazine's Most Played in Jukeboxes chart. For those of you who don't know what a jukebox is, I'm really sad and I feel very old right now. A jukebox was a thing that had a bunch of 45s in it, and 45s were like the little looking albums that you had to take that plastic bit and put it in the center to get it to play on your record player, because it had a bigger hole than the LPs did. and you would just put your quarter in or your nickel or whatever it was at the time, and you would select your song, and then everyone in the restaurant had to listen to it because you picked it. So, well before the days of the boombox or personal, listening devices with, like the Walkmans and stuff where you had your own headphones and didn't have to bother anybody with whatever you wanted to hear. Really, really cool idea. It was great. People would get up in the, like the dime stores and the, like the soda fountains and stuff. And, they might even dance to some of these songs if they're so inclined. It was a really different time in music. And if you want to know what a soda fountain is, watch Back to the Future. That is where Marty first meets his dad, is at a soda fountain. We had a soda fountain in Michigan. It was definitely a 50s style type place. It was really cool. I would love to go back to one of those now if it was done in that same authentic way. But in any case, let's check out Mean Woman Blues.
I got a woman, she's mean as she can be. I got a woman, she's as mean as she can be. Sometimes I think she's almost mean as me. She's so mean, she's so dark. I got a woman mean as she can be. She can be mean.
Well, that was cool the way Gary came in on that. I wasn't sure how far they were going to go with it just being vocals and drums, but and I really like what he's playing too. I would imagine this is probably double the walking bass line that the original song had. Again, I don't know the song. I've not heard it before, or not that I recall anyway. Certainly not well enough to speak to how it's played. But this is pretty cool. I like it.
I got a woman mean as she can be. Sometimes I think she's almost mean as me. You ain't not about a hound, no.
Well, I guess that was that for Mean Woman Blues. Pretty short version of it here of the 6 songs that we have here in the medley. And that seems like a great place to take an episode break. We'll be back tomorrow with the last part of the rock and roll medley. Hope you guys have a great day. Cheers! Thank you for joining me on this episode of Uriah Heep, the Magician's Podcast. If you have enjoyed this show, please consider going over to Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast outlet, leaving a rating or a review. Be sure to subscribe to make sure that you are notified when new episodes are available. Please be sure to share this podcast with your fellow Uriah Heep enthusiasts and anyone who you think would like Uriah Heep, which should be everyone. And if you are so inclined, please feel free to contribute to the Patreon account. And if you are not a Patreon subscriber, you can also pay through the PayPal link on the website listed in the show links below. I would also like to thank Uriah Heep for their very generous support of the show. And thank you guys for listening. We'll see you in the next episode. Happy days!